The Sun and Wayward Stars by ThBiButterfly, Chapter 4, A Dirty Trick. Sirius and Potter shoved each other playfully on the way to their rooms after dinner. Regulus followed them, holding the books he'd inadvertently brought to the meal tied to his chest. He was excited to read them, but nervous at the same time. It was vital he treat them with exercise care, so that Monty wouldn't mind him borrowing more. "Reggie, want to play Exploding Snap before we go to bed?" Sirius asked, his chin resting on his own shoulder as he met Regulus's eyes. "All right, let me drop off these books first," Regulus agreed, nodding slowly. As they passed his room, he ducked in to stack the books on his nightstand, reappearing quickly. He glanced around the deserted hallway warily. "Where did you go?" Potter's voice bounded off the halls around him. "Right here. Can't you see us?" Regulus spun around in a circle, then rubbed his temple. "I don't. Serious?" A low giggle erupted from behind him. Did you see him spin, James?" Reaching out into the empty air in confusion, Regulus felt something soft slip through his fingers. He tried again, but now it was gone. Staring at the wall, he ruffled a hand through his hair. "What did you do?" A hand landed on his shoulder, startling him. Sirius leaned in and left a loud smacking kiss on his cheek when he turned his head. Huffing in annoyance, Regulus wiped the saliva out of his cheek. Potter propped against the wall next to him, a smug grin on his face. "How did you do that?" Regulus asked, glancing between them. "Is it a spell? Can you show me?" Potter shook his head. "It's top secret. Sorry." His brother wrapped an arm around Regulus from behind. "Can't tell you that secret, but I can show you another one. Wanna see?" "Serious," Potter warned, his voice suddenly stern. "That's not a good idea. He could tell." "Nonsense! We can trust him with this, right, Reggie?" Sirius insisted, hopping from one foot excitedly to the other. Regulus tilted his head to the side. "I won't tell your secrets, Sirius. You know that." Gesturing at Regulus with both hands, Sirius grinned at Potter. "See? Trustworthy." He promptly dropped to the floor and disappeared, a large black animal taking his place. Leaping back in shock, Regulus's back hit Potter's chest. Large hands gripped his elbows, holding him in place. "It's all right. He's just a big dog." Potter's voice was low and soothing in his ear, his breath tickling his hair along Regulus's neck. The large creature padded forward, tongue lolling out its mouth. Despite Potter's assurance, it looked more like a bear than any dog Regulus had ever seen. A big grin spread across its face as it lifted its enormous paws up into Regulus's shoulders, letting out a low woof in his face. Inhaling sharply, Regulus leaned away when the dog's tongue lapped eagerly at his chin. Potter released one of his elbows to push the dog back to the floor. "Stop that, Bats. You're scaring him." "I'm not afraid," he retorted. Regulus took a deep breath and shook himself clear. He stared down at the dog, trying desperately to find his brother in the animal's features. The creature's startling blue eyes sparkled with mischief, and its nose wiggled playfully as it barked at him. It was definitely serious, and he was definitely laughing at him. "You're an animagus. Serious. That's dangerous." Regulus spluttered, completely overwhelmed. He pulled free from Potter's grasp and crouched down to the extreme dog more closely. With his heart pounding against his chest and fear dancing in his mind, he was floored with worry. How? Oh, wait, I can process this." He dropped to his knees, then reached out tentatively, fingers brushing the animal's fur. The dog leaned into his touch, whining softly. Regulus let out an exasperated huff and gripped the mane of the fur around its head. "What were you thinking? You could have died." "It's not that bad," Potter refuted, crouching down next to him. "We were careful. Took some time, though." "What? You did this too?" Regulus asked, his voice growing higher than he'd intended. He stared at Potter incredulously. "This is the height of foolishness." Potter shrugged. "It was for a good cause, which I can't explain. Sorry." Eyeing him suspiciously, Regulus relaxed his hand in the dog's fur. He glanced from the dog to Potter and back again. "Are you a dog too?" No," Potter chuckled sheepishly. "Mine's too big to show you in the hallway." "Too big," Regulus repeated, eyes widening. "What is it?" Bobbing his head side to side, Potter shrugged. "Do you want to see or not?" Regulus blinked rapidly at him. "I suppose so." Nodding, Potter stood up and opened his bedroom door. The dog bounded inside, shoving Potter out of the way. "For fuck's sakes, pet food!" he huffed, watching the dog leap onto his bed. He turned back to Regulus and offered him a hand. "Come on." He eyed the proffered hand, then the open door. "You want me to go into your room?" "Just for a minute, so you can see," Potter replied plaintively, reaching down to grab Regulus's hand. He pulled him to his feet with little effort. Before Regulus could protest, Potter dragged him to the room, then shut the door. Regulus stuck his hand free and crossed his arm over his chest. He wanted to stay close to Sirius, but the dog was sprawled across the bed, and that was the last place Regulus would sit. This was Potter's bedroom, after all, and the thought made him queasy. Leaning against the door, Potter studied him for a long moment. He tilted his head to one side and released a long, slow breath. "Do you promise not to say anything? It's important, Regulus." "I won't tell anyone, but I still think it's asinine of both of you," Regulus muttered. Potter pulled his top lip into his mouth and nodded. "All right. Here's mine." He dropped face first towards the door and abruptly transformed into a giant stag. Regulus clapped a hand to his mouth, backing against the wall. He stared at the animal, taking in the sheer size of it and the widespread antlers that swept the ceiling. It was roughly the same shade of brown as Potter himself, with white fur circling his eyes. Completely mental. The animal stepped forwards, eyes flitting over Regulus curiously, before staring intently at his hands. After a few minutes of staring at each other, Regulus felt the dog at his side, nudging his wrists with his nose. Blinking rapidly, he looked down to find the dog glancing pointedly at the stag and then back at Regulus. Frowning, Regulus shook his head. "That's unnecessary." Growling wildly, the dog snagged his sleeve between his teeth and dragged him forward. The stag remained still, but made a low, bleating sound at the dog. Regulus got a distinct impression they were reprimanding him. It was reprimanding him, as the canine immediately let go of his sleeve and began to headbutt Regulus's legs to push him forward instead. All right, Regulus grumbled, stepping closer to the stag. He was within a meter of the animal now, carefully observing the antlers as it moved. It was enormous, its head several inches above Regulus's. The stag lowered its muzzle, its big brown eyes watching Regulus shift slowly forward. When Regulus was in arm's reach, he cautiously lifted his hands. Sniffing in the Sniffing in his direction, the stag leaned forward and rubbed its nose against Regulus's fingers. His rings clinked together slightly as the stag's soft muscles slid under his palm. While Regulus realized the stag was actually Potter in some logical area of his brain, he couldn't help the small smile that slipped free as his fingers brushed over the creature's nose. The stag's gaze softened as it pressed into its hand, letting out a huff. Regulus stroked his hands up the animal's muzzle and traced the shape of its ears. It remained calm and quiet, which was a huge relief to Regulus. The dog's energy and chaotic movements were too overwhelming at first. This was better. "Is that enough?" Regulus asked the dog, his hand falling to his side. Snorting derisively, the stag lunged forward, nearly toppling Regulus to the floor. At the last second, he grabbed hold of the stag's neck to keep himself in balance. In a flash, the stag was gone, and Regulus was left holding into Potter instead. A smug grin was firmly in place as his hands wrapped around Regulus's waist, lifting him upright. Regulus pulled his hand back immediately, and his face flushed. "That was a dirty trick, Potter." "He's full of them," Sirius commented, now returning to himself and sitting on the floor behind Regulus. "Watch that one, he's sneaky." His gaze swiveled to Potter, and a series of facial expressions passed between them. Finally, Potter shrugged noncommittally, which made Sirius narrow his eyes. "What was that?" Regulus began, shifting closer to Sirius. "Don't worry about it," Sirius interrupted, eyes still trained on Potter. Potter ignored the pointed look, wandering across the room and reaching for a pack of playing cards. As he brought them back, Potter handed them to Regulus silently, then settled onto his bed. He pulled out his wand and began twirling it through his fingers. Sirius followed his progress, tongue poked into his cheek thoughtfully. Regulus held out the pack to Sirius before dropping to the floor in front of him. It took Sirius a full minute to decide Potter was staying put and turn his full attention back to Regulus. Completely lost without context for this non-verbal communication, Regulus pulled his knees up to his chest and waited. This must be a best friends thing. He'd already lost his battle if they had a secret silent code that he couldn't begin to decipher. "All right, exploding snap time," Sirius said finally, pulling the cards from the pack and dividing them. They played 3 games before Sirius tossed the cards in the air in frustration. He won the first, but Regulus won the second too. "Stupid bloody game," Sirius grumbled, crossing his arms over his chest and glaring at Potter. Waving his wand at the cards, Potter collected them easily and summoned them back to his desk. He was now stretched out on his back, staring at the canopy over his bed. Regulus glanced between the 2 boys, suddenly sensing he was preventing a conversation with his presence. Standing slowly, Regulus clasped his hands together. "I'm kind of tired. I think I'll go to bed now." When no one acknowledged him, Regulus headed out of the door. No sooner he opened his own when he heard a low buzz of a muffling charm coming from Potter's room. His sense was clearly correct, meaning they were likely talking about him. Regulus deflated, shuffling into his assigned bedroom. The next morning began with a loud bang that shook the entire house. Regulus bolted upright, eyes wide and worried. Sirius appeared a moment later, shoving open the door with his hands outstretched. It's all right. Don't panic. Monty may have blown up his lab again." "Does that happen often?" Regulus asked, incredulous at his calm demeanor. "Fairly regularly, yes," Sirius admitted. He's working on a lot of experimental potion, so occasionally they go airy. He has shields that and whatnot in place, of course. It's just loud. Potter peered over Sirius's shoulder, his glasses shoved on top of his messy curls. He looked even more disheveled than usual. "All right." Sirius reached up and patted his cheek. "We're fine." Potter mumbled something incoherent and headed down the hall to the loo. Watching him leave, Sirius sighed. He's going to be in a foul mood today. "Why?" Regulus asked, flopping back onto his pillows. Not that he particularly cared about Potter's mood. It was simply the best to be prepared, understanding thy enemy and all that. He overslept. Normally he's up at breakfast of dawn running drills, Sirius answered, shrugging lightly. "Nutter," Regulus grumbled, pulling the quilt over his head. Huffing a laugh, Sirius pulled the door closed. When his eyes flicked open a few hours later, the sun was fairly high in the sky. Regulus stretched, a bleary sort of groan escaping him. He wasn't sure what woke him, but decided it was well past time to join the rest of the world. Breathing in deeply, Regulus shoved back the quilt and planted his feet on the floor. A light tapping at the window drew his attention. Regulus rubbed a hand over his chest as he stared at the window pensively. It took several long, slow blinks to spot the tiny golden snitch that danced around the window panes. Curious, he heaved himself out of the bed and wandered towards it, squinting through the glass. The grounds surrounding the manor were vast and green, uninterrupted in their beauty except by that appearing to be a half Quidditch court set up well back from the prying eyes of their neighbors. The snitch rapped against the window again, amusing Regulus. He pushed open the window and let his tiny Bosworth inside his room. Glancing to the ground, he spotted Potter leisurely flying low and slow on his broom. Regulus watched him make several passes along the side of the house before he looked up. Potter lurched forward on his broom, soaring upwards to Regulus's window. He was floating casually about 10 feet from Regulus with a wry grin on his face. "Morning." Is it?" Regulus hummed, still a bit groggy. He was well aware of the time, but didn't have a better response. Checking his watch, Potter nodded. "For another 20 minutes, anyway. Have a nice lie-in." "Better than at the dorm," Regulus huffed. He heard the snitch buzzing around his head and shot his hand up to grab it mid-air. Staring at him in shock, Potter released his startled laugh. "You didn't even see it." "I can hear it," Regulus muttered, arching an eyebrow at him. "It's quite loud, actually." Potter drifted closer. "Care to practice with me? I could use the company." He nodded towards the Quidditch bridge. Regulus eyed him skeptically. "Where's Sirius?" "Chasing rabbits," Potter answered promptly, hooking a thumb towards the wooden area behind him. Blinking slowly, Regulus's brows knit together. "Pardon?" He must have heard that wrong. A smirk slid across Potter's face. He's Padfoot right now. Decided to chase rabbits in the wood. "Padfoot is..." Regulus trailed off, eyes flitting upwards as his sluggish brain puzzled the pieces together. "The dog," Potter clarified. "We gave our animagus forms nicknames. Mine is Bronx, fairly obvious. Sirius is Padfoot, and Peter is Wormtail." Regulus frowned. "Pettigrew's in on this as well?" Potter nodded. "He's a rat." "A rat," Regulus repeated, rubbing a hand over his face. "Can I skip that introduction?" "For now," Potter agreed, smirk widening with amusement. Sighing heavily, Regulus ruffled a hand through his hair. "All right, then." "So?" Potter asked, drifting a bit closer. Regulus squinted at him. "So?" Chuckling, Potter prompted his arms on his broom. "Are you coming out or not?" "Can I get dressed first?" Regulus snarked, glancing over his shoulder at the bureau. When he looked back at the window, Potter was staring at his hands rather intently. "What now?" "Nothing," Potter said, turning his head towards the pitch. It was an odd move, actually. His eyes stayed focused on Regulus, while his head turned away, until he couldn't do both anymore. He rolled his eyes and threw the snitch at Potter. "Piss off, Potter." The tiny ball bounced off his shoulder and then took a flight anew, zipping widely into the air. Regulus closed the window and the curtains, blocking Potter's view. Glancing down at the vest and pajama pants he'd found in the bureau, Regulus sighed. It was a shame he had to change. They were quite comfortable. So soft, with no itchy tags or rough seams to drive him mad. He hated wearing robes, but it was expected of him. The longer he looked at his clothes, the more hesitant he was to remove them. Based on the sizing, he assumed they were serious at the fit, but just slightly too big. His brother loved Muggle clothes, and Regulus could understand why. They were far easier to move around in, and not nearly as proper. His mother would have an apoplectic fit if she saw them. Might just be worth it. Thank you for watching or listening to this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And well, for fuck's sakes. You'd think that after so many outros I've done, I'd get less awkward, but here I am surprising all of us. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. Have a nice day. I put the link in the description. Do please, if you want to read ahead, or Jesus fucking Christ. Have a nice day. Please go to the link to give the author of this fic all the love they deserve. Have a very nice day. I am going to stop talking now.